Chapter 25 from the Book of the Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis. On the fervent amendment of our whole life. This is the newly edited version by Clair Fitzpatrick. Be alert and diligent in the service of God, thinking often why you were born and why you have left the world. Was it not that you should live only for God and become a spiritual person? Certainly it was. Therefore, set your heart on striving for perfection, for shortly you will be rewarded for all the labors, and after that you will never experience sorrow and dread. Your labor will last but a short time, and then you will receive everlasting rest and peace. If you are faithful and fervent in doing good, there is no doubt that God will be faithful and generous in his reward. Have a firm hope that you will attain the victory, but do not presume on this, for then there is danger of your becoming careless and proud. Once there was a person who was anxious whether or not he was in the state of grace. One day, in his sadness, he fell to his knees before an altar in the church, praying, "Oh, if only I knew whether I would persevere to the end of my life." Suddenly he heard a voice within him answering, "What would you do if you did know? If you did know, do now what you would do then, and you will be secure." Immediately he was comforted, and commended himself entirely to God's will, and all his doubts ceased. After that, he never speculated as to what would become of him. Instead, he applied himself to know what was the will of God for him, and how he might begin and end all his good works to the honor and glory of God. The prophet David tells us, "Put your trust in the Lord, and do good, that you may well dwell in the land and be secure." One thing holds many back from spiritual advancement and earnest amendment, that is, the fear and dislike of the effort and difficulties involved in the struggle. Yet those attain surpassing virtue who struggle bravely against the very things which they find hardest and most repugnant to them. For a person profits most and gains the most graces precisely in the area where the difficulties are greatest and require the most mortification. Certain it is that all persons do not have the same difficulties to overcome and mortify. Nevertheless, those who ardently love God, even though their passions are stronger than those of others, will be able to grow in virtue than those with good habits and fewer passions, but who are less fervent in pursuing holiness. Two things which need to make real progress are: you must withdraw yourself from those things to which you are prone by nature, and strive for the particular virtue you most need. Especially be on your guard against and correct those faults which most annoy you in other people. Use all occasions for your spiritual gain. If you observe good example, follow it, and if you see bad example, take care not to do the same. If you have already fallen into this fault, work to correct it quickly. As your eye observes others, be sure that you also are observed by them. What an inspiration to see religious persons devout and fervent in the love of God, courteous and self-disciplined. On the other hand, how sad to see those whose lives are disorderly and do not practice those things to which they are called. How detrimental it is for us to neglect the purpose of our calling, and to divert our minds to things that are not our concern. Keep in mind your commitment. Place yourself before the image of Christ crucified, and see if you are not ashamed, when looking into his life, that you have done so little to model your life on his. Those who will meditate devoutly on the life and passion of our Lord will find there all that is necessary for them, and will not have to look further. If Jesus crucified were often in our hearts, how quickly we would learn all things we need to know. Religious persons put up with, and accept willingly whatever they are commanded to do. But the neglectful and lukewarm are always in difficulty, and have great anguish besides, for they lack interior comfort and cannot seek it outside. Undisciplined persons, who seek to be released from their duties, will always be in trouble, for nothing will ever satisfy them. Consider the strict life others lead who are bound by the rules of the cloister. They seldom go out, live in retirement, eat sparingly, are poorly clothed, work hard, speak little, keep long vigils, rise early, pray much, read often, and discipline themselves. Look how the Carthusians, Cistercians, and many other religious men and women rise in the night to sing the divine office. Aren't you ashamed, then, of being so lazy and lukewarm? What a beautiful life it would be if we had nothing else to do but lift our hearts and voices to praise our Lord. If you never had to eat, drink, or sleep, but were solely occupied in praising God and studying the way of perfection, you would be far happier than you are now, when there is always some bodily need to be looked after. If only there were not such needs, and we could be wholly occupied with spiritual refreshment, which, sad to say, we taste all too seldom. When people reach that state where they seek consolation from no creature, then they begin to waste the sweetness of God and to be content with whatever happens. They care for no worldly profit, however great, nor pine for the want of it, because they are wholly committed to God, who is their all, God for whom nothing is ever lost or dies, and to whom all things live, and ever obediently render service. Always remember your end, and that time lost can never be regained. Without applying yourself diligently, you will never acquire virtue. The moment you begin to be lukewarm, your trouble begins. But if you give yourself wholeheartedly to fervor, you will experience great help from God, and you will find the pursuit of virtue less burdensome than you did at first. Those who are fervent and loving will always be ready to do God's will. It is harder to resist vices and passions than to toil and sweat in bodily labors. If you do not shun little faults, you will gradually fall into greater ones. If you spend the day well, you will be happy when night comes. Watch yourself, stir yourself up, warm yourself. Whatever your obligation to others, do not neglect your own soul. The more restraints you put on yourself, the more spiritual progress you will make, and the greater your attachment to the will of God. That's the end of book 1. The next is book 2, Considerations for Leading an Interior Life. We'll start that tomorrow.